This man needs no introduction. Second-time police commissioner of the largest police force in the world. Bratton, thanks for joining.
Great to be here again.
You've declared in the past that predictive policing is the wave of the future. And obviously it intends to use data to try and detect and prevent crime. What's its success in New York?
Success is still unknown because it's just really beginning. I've been in the business 45 years, came into it in the 70s during what was called the professional era of policing. The idea of better training, better education of officers, better supervision would make for a better police force. Coming out of the civil rights era of the 60s, the Kerner Report, and the idea that police needed to be better trained. In the 80s, that despite all of that, with the issues of guns, violence, drugs, crime rates exploded, prison populations began to increase. And then in the 90s, we began to correct it. We embraced the philosophy of community policing, partnership, problem solving, focus on prevention, returning to Sir Robert Peel's emphasis on prevention. In the 21st century, we moved into the intelligence era where we have the capability to gather up huge amounts of information, analyze it, and put cops on the dots, emerging patterns and trends of crime. But in doing that, and certainly in this city, the issue was too many cops basically on those dots, and so that the stop, question, and frisk controversy, which is so universally known and understood here, 2010, almost 700,000 stops, largely of minority young males. As we move forward, we have now been over to reduce. Last year, I think we had about 25,000 stops, but crime continues to go down in the city to record lows. Where we are now in 2015 is by our use of technology, huge investments in technology, is we're moving into the predictive policing era, where we can really anticipate that a crime is likely to occur in this location during this period of time if there's not an intervention. It's like a doctor looking at a patient and analyzing that patient and saying, you have the beginning symptoms that if I give you a medicine, a prescription, I can stop that cold from getting worse. And I'm dealing with a cold, so excuse me if I sound stuffed up. And that's what we're trying to do with predictive policing by putting cops into an area to prevent it from happening. But more importantly than that is when they go into the area that they're known, neighborhood policing, and that they are sensitive to the issues of the community. That's where the partnership comes in.
What do you say? There are some critics who argue that it becomes another form of, potentially, of racial profiling, the way you thought stop and frisk did.
I don't see that. I'm aware of those arguments that are being made, but I don't see it. That in policing, we respond to 911 calls. We respond in this city to 311 calls. So we don't create those calls. So the preponderance of police response that goes into poor neighborhoods, into minority neighborhoods, into, in this city, housing developments, which are a combination of minority and poor, that those two generators of police action are not controlled by the police. What we do control is, as in stop, question, and frisk, self-initiated activity. And so to deal with that self-initiated activity, what we're attempting to do is effectively get the police to see the community, police to see us, get the police to hear the community, get the community to hear us, so that we can find some common ground to deal with the issues that generate the 911 crime calls, the 311 quality of life calls. And so to that end, that, for example, in this city, every one of my offices by March will have one of these. It's a custom-designed smartphone. It has a significant number of apps that will help those officers to predict where a crime is going to occur. It'll help those officers also to interact with the public, because we'll be able to give the public great amounts of information. If an officer stops somebody because he has a photo of a suspect, he's able to show that person, oh, I stopped you because, one, you look very much like, here's the photo, here's the description. But more importantly, it gives our officers timely information. An example just from yesterday, we had a series of bank robberies over the last couple of weeks in Manhattan, up to almost, I think, about 15. Yesterday, the character committing them was literally going bank to bank to bank and being turned away.
This is the guy with the Band-Aids on his face?
That's the guy with the Band-Aid. And my officers got on their smartphone. They had programmed the smartphone that it would vibrate, alert them as the bank robbery calls were coming in. So before a dispatcher in the 911 center could even broadcast the call, the detectives were getting the vibe that the bank robbery had just occurred. They were able to respond immediately to the area and got them. Just one use of this technology. Another app we have here, which will be of great benefit in the city of immigrants and the city of so many languages, is the language app. You can speak into this phone on that app, and it will translate orally and in writing for my police officer to be able to, if an English-speaking officer is dealing with a Spanish-speaking victim, the ability to communicate so much more in a city with 60 million tourists. So as you're aware, Ken, we're embarked on a very significant undertaking in the Blasio administration to find common ground with our communities where we lost so much ground over the last number of years. And the basis we're trying to build upon is how do we develop more trust? Technology is one of the ways, training, certainly another, better tactics in dealing with crime, and then also dealing with the issue of terrorism, which is of so much concern to our Muslim community, feeling that they may feel the impact that the Black or Latino community felt for so many years by police unnecessarily intruding themselves into their lives. So there's a lot underway at this time.
You mentioned training. One of the things you did last year with the mayor's support was to impose a requirement on everyone, including the commissioner, to take 3 days of retraining. And your aim was to change what you thought was the culture of the New York City Police Department, to create more empathy on the part of. How do you measure whether you succeeded or failed at that?
Let me just briefly explain what we're doing with training, that we have totally revamped the 6 months of training that our recruit officers get, totally revamped it, including in the middle of that training, after 3 months, they are assigned out to a precinct for 10 days to learn about the precinct, midpoint in their training, to go out and feel it, because many of our officers don't come from the neighborhoods they're going to police. When they graduate, they go back to that same precinct, but now they are assigned to a volunteer field training officer, a senior officer who's been specially trained to mentor them for their first 6 months. The old system was the kids would roll out of the academy, be put into the highest crime neighborhoods under the supervision of a sergeant, with 12 of them, and be encouraged to get activity. And we saw the results of that with the disaster of stop, question, and frisk. What we are also doing with that training is that we are expanding the in-service training after academy every year. My officers will go through a minimum of 5 days of training, where in the past they only went through 2 days of firearms training. They will now have expanded training to deal with issues, stop, question, frisk, the wide range of issues that are necessary to teach them to deal better with the public. In addition, many other officers will get additional training. Almost 5,000 of my officers this year, for example, will be getting 4 days of training on how to deal with the emotionally disturbed. Why so much emphasis on training? Because we understand you would not want to go to a doctor who received his education 30 years ago and never kept updated on the latest trends in medicine. Similarly, you don't want police who received training 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of which we now find was not appropriate and certainly not appropriate for today. So the training is essential. And one example I will give you of the benefit of training. In the 1970s, the New York City Police Department was averaging, in many of those years, over 900 incidents in which police used their firearms, at a time when 12 police officers a year were being killed, in which hundreds of people were being shot in the city. Last year, 2015, we had, I think the figure was 65 incidents in a 36,000-person police force where officers fired their guns. 65 times. 18 of those were for attacking dogs. A number of them were accidental. In 32 instances, we actually were in a combat situation. Think of this, in a city of 8.5 million people, with 36,000 cops on only 32 instances. During the course of that, 8 lives were taken by New York City police officers, all of them taken during an attack upon those officers. So we have learned the training can significantly reduce from 900 in the 70s down to 65. We have the lowest use of force, particularly deadly force, use of firearms, and use of force of any large-scale police department in America at this current time. So with training, we're hoping to address a lot of the issues that the community has raised with us: unnecessary force, indifference, so many of the things that have been identified.
One of the things that the city council has raised with you is this. One of the things the city council has raised with you and the mayor is that they want to decriminalize some of the quality of life arrests that people undergo, and I wonder how. I mean, if you take away public urination as one, drinking out of a container alcoholic beverage is two. There are a number of others. What does this do to your lifelong commitment to something called broken windows?
Broken windows, quality of life. Thank you for that question, because it's a live issue at the moment. We've been engaged for the last year and a half in discussions with the city council. We're very confident that in the next several weeks, next month or so, we'll come to a resolution of the issues. That the council and a significant number of their members really feel that a lot of these quality of life types of violations, fear evasion, public urination, drinking in public, have been used inappropriately by the police, particularly against the communities of color. At the same time, when I look at where my 311 calls are coming from, my 911 calls, what are the 311 calls about? Urination, particularly in the public housing developments, that people calling about people urinating in the hallways. Noise complaints, barbecues on the streets with hundreds of people that disrupt the neighborhoods late into the night. So how do I find this balance where large parts of the community want something done, but there's a concern that the penalties are too draconian? Very much about the incarceration issue, which has been so much of the discussion today, that the penalties for so many crimes are too severe, particularly for possession of drugs or conspiracy, non-violent crimes. What I think will come to an agreement around is that I will not lose, my police officers will not lose the ability to use criminal law, but the criminal law will not be the first resort. The first resort we would do is the scale: admonition, summons, arrest if appropriate. But the first interaction would be a civil violation, so that if I stopped you for urinating or I responded to a call of somebody urinating in one of the public housing development hallways, I would come in, I would check your ID, you have no record, you have no wants and wanted, I know who you are. I can give you a warning. I can eject you, or I can, and hopefully we'll be able to develop a warning form, which I would strongly support, that would be a written warning so we could document repeated misbehavior, failure to correct behavior. And it would have, as we're also changing the summonses, so that the summons form will show issues of sex, issues of race, so we have an ability to determine, are we disproportionately impacting on communities of color or by sex. So the discussions with the council have been ongoing, and we expect that we'll come to resolution. Something I'd point out, and I'll close with this in terms of the question. Over the last 2 years, since the election of Mayor Blasio, working with me and the police department, we have reduced by almost 1 million each year the enforcement actions of the NYPD. I have a larger police force than we had 2 years ago, but the enforcement actions by that police force are down. Stop, question, frisk by almost 600,000, summonses by hundreds of thousands, arrests, particularly for marijuana, minor drug-related offenses, down dramatically. Almost 1 million fewer police interactions with the communities in New York City.
In the wake of deaths at the hands of police officers in Ferguson or Baltimore or Staten Island, a wave has swept across the country to better monitor the police and check some of their potentially abusive powers. What is your reaction to that? I mean, you have more monitors in New York.
I don't have a problem with that. I was chief of police in Los Angeles for 7 years with the most extensive federal monitoring system in the history of the country. At the end of those 7 years, studies that were done by Harvard University, we commissioned Harvard to come in to do the studies for us. What had been the impact of the federal monitorship? Crime was down dramatically in the city, but maybe most importantly, relationships between the police and the community, and the relationship between the black community and LAPD had not been a good one. It was like literally open warfare for almost 50 years. And I felt very good at the end of 7 years that even the LA Times, which was a significant entity always going after LAPD, reported in an editorial that finally the corner had been turned on race relations, in that they were starting to get polling indicating that the majority of citizens, even in the black communities, felt that the police had become more responsive. As a result of the stop, question, and frisk controversy, we now have a federal monitor that's working with us on the development of our training procedures, our policies, and guidelines. We have an inspector general now that, like other inspector generals for other city agencies, has the ability to self-initiate investigations, make policy recommendations. The CCRB has been significantly strengthened under its new director, Richard Emery. Each of those entities, and in addition, I'm going to, relative to our terrorism activity, Handshoe agreement that will be adding a new individual to that, who we hope will be a very prominent jurist that we're conducting interviews now. So sum and substance, the department has, in the last 2 years, basically engaged in more oversight than at any time in its history, and at this point, probably has more oversight over it than any other police force in America. Because we also have, above the Inspector General, is the Department of Investigation. We also have 2 U.S. attorneys who are not shy about investigating police, and 5 district attorneys. We work with all of them collaboratively. I'm not fighting the monitor. We're working very closely with CCRB. And what's the good news coming out of all this? 1 million fewer police interactions. CCRB complaints, even at a time when CCRB is attempting to encourage people to report.
Define CCRBs.
Civilian Complaint Review Board. And it is finding that complaints against police are down fairly dramatically by double digit, so that we are seeing a lot of changes that over time, like what had occurred in Los Angeles, will be beneficial. In the meantime, as I referenced, that while some deaths involving police action are very controversial, the case of Mr. Garner in Staten Island, for example, here in New York, that the amount of force used by the NYPD in the making of the almost 250,000 arrests we make is some of the lowest levels of force. And in that regard, we've just taken all of our use of force policies, reviewed them, put them into one place, and we'll be retraining our officers on these now contemporized, modernized new policies.
Let me try and squeeze in two last questions. Some people think of you and Mayor de Blasio as the odd couple. He's a left liberal by his own definition. You're not. And yet you have said you've never had better support in being commissioner in Boston or LA or here before than you have from him. What drug did you administer to him?
On this issue, the mayor really gets a bad rap. That, let's face it, the New York Post hates him, and if they can find anything wrong, they beat up on him. No, I think of myself in my profession as a progressive, that not too far to the right, not too far to the left, centrist, open to change, and certainly I think of myself as a transformational change agent in every police department I've worked in. There are certain principles I believe strongly in. Sir Robert Peel's first principle of the 9, which are every bit as relevant today as they were back in 1829 when he wrote them. The basic mission for which the police exists is to prevent crime and disorder. In the 70s and 80s, we focused almost entirely on serious crime and paid no attention to the quality of life crime that destroyed the city. The graffiti that covers every inch of space in the city, the prostitution, the 8,000 open-air drug locations that significantly exacerbated the drug problem, the violence that went with us, that it's, and all of you who are parents in the room understand that if you don't correct a child's behavior as they're developing, that behavior is going to get out of control when they get into their teenage years. So what we have to do in policing is find the right balance. By reducing by 1 million the negative police interactions, that's beginning to find balance. By giving officers more discretion to issue a warning, a civil warning, rather than a criminal summons or arrest, that's another effort to find balance. Where the mayor is, and where we are joined at the hip, is trying to find, he's a progressive, maybe much farther to the left on many social issues than I might be, but on law enforcement, we are very much centrist. He understands the importance of finding balance. Like a doctor treating a patient. You give the patient too much chemo, cancer, you're going to kill him. Similarly, if you give the patient, the community, too much enforcement, you're going to kill them, literally. And we saw some of that, unfortunately, in the city with stop, question, and frisk issues. So he is a strong supporter of quality of life, broken windows, but balanced with the idea that it needs to be done fairly, impartially, and done in a transparent way. And that's the effort we're joined in.
I want to thank Commissioner. We're out of time. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you. Thank you.